I can't tell people how underrated Rockville as a suburb is when you've got $1.2 billion in the budget from state government.
Apparently a few first home buyers have been speaking to sales agents and going, well, I'm just going to wait till that comes into effect, not realising that every other first home buyer is doing the exact same thing.
We don't believe that it's made in the best interest of our clients and property owners.
I always say to people, follow infrastructure, don't follow a real estate's gut feeling.
As this evening was marketed, property investment is not a joke. I'm quite renowned in the office for my dad jokes, so I thought it'd be remiss of me not to enlighten everyone with how bad they can get. So I've got a property-related joke here to kick us off. Does anyone know why a property appraisal person?
Yeah, Daddy got it.
Just like that, people. If you want any other tips on comedy, I'll be on the stage a bit later. I'll give that another crack. Does anyone know why a property appraiser carries a bee in their pocket? No? Brilliant. Because value is in the eye of the beholder. Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, back crowd got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is exactly how my jokes in the office go as well. As long as I get to laugh at the end of the night, it's a win for me. So, look, I'll cut the cheese out of it. We'll get straight into the questions, and I'll direct this one straight to you, Jacob, with the number one question everyone in real estate dreads getting. So, heaps is happening in Toowoomba in the sense of growth and investment. How's the market?
Thank you, Greg. That question was originally going to be pitched at Leon. So, how's the market? The market is ever evolving, but it depends on which part of the market you're most interested in. So I will try and strictly talk about residential investment, and then I'll let Leon talk about sales and commercial, and then Joe can talk about finance, and Bridget can talk about the residential leasing. But in terms of residential investment, it's still really tight for tenants. We've got a 0.8% vacancy rate, which is very challenging, and it's been below 1% for a couple of years now. But what the media doesn't tell you when they flash housing crisis over the headlines is the quality in applicants on residential properties has all but disappeared. So, and Bridget will talk a little bit more about this, but it's quite common for us to have a lineup of people that you do see on the news and in the papers. A lineup of people come to an open house, but really out of those, one or two might actually be decent and worth putting into your investment property. And we take that process very seriously because it's a serious deal, because they're going to live in there for an extended period of time, most likely. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that the right person is going into your property at any one time. Rents have continued to increase. So overall, between houses and units, over the last 12 months, year on year, rents have increased by 8% across the Toowoomba region specifically, which is quite a big jump. And Toowoomba is known for not seeing a heap of volatility. So you won't see the massive jumps that a capital city might see, but you won't see the massive troughs as well in that regard. So to have an 8% year-on-year growth is quite substantial. But in saying that, we forecast that volatility isn't coming to Toowoomba. We're going to continue to see that smooth curve over time. And I think that's broadly across all assets, residential and commercial.
Yeah, brilliant. Heading into this year, we had a series of rate increases and different things like that, which I know I was pretty pessimistic on the 2024 property market coming in to the new year. I don't think we've seen any negative effects to the market as such, but Joe, how have the conversations changed from this time last year to where we are today?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks everyone for having me. I didn't get the dress memo, obviously. I thought we were all wearing brown suits, but anyway. So yeah, I'm from Brizzy, in Toowoomba, at least fortnightly, and I absolutely love it here. Any of my clients from Brizzy all seem to be very hungry investors for Toowoomba, probably because I talk about it so much, and I am very passionate about the region. So thanks for having me along tonight. To answer your question in terms of what's changed, I think ironically, the podcast that launched today was with me in it. So I was listening to that on the way here. I'm thinking, this guy's got no idea, honestly. What was he talking about 2-3 months ago? But I think the main thing is, obviously, people are now starting to feel the pinch. So without getting too economical about all of this, Australia is quite unique in that for a number of years during the COVID period, discretionary spending, or just, I should say savings, was really high. So people couldn't travel overseas, they couldn't go interstate. If they weren't buying luxury cars or spending their money on jet skis, they were putting their money into their offset account and saving it. Australia also had a really high rate of fixed loans, which meant that when the RBA decided to raise the cash rate, not everyone felt that straight away. Compared to the US, for example, where a much larger portion of borrowers are on floating or variable rates. And so there's a much quicker reaction from consumers and borrowers when the Reserve Bank decides to increase the cash rate. So in Australia, we don't have that, or we didn't feel that as much. So I think because of that, there's been a lag effect. So we had rate increase, people still bidding at auctions super strong, people still spending in the same way, still going out for that nice steak dinner 2 or 3 nights a week, in Brisbane in particular, maybe Toowoomba as well. And people had a lot of savings as well. So what that meant is their deposits were quite strong. So even if their borrowing capacity was impacted by the rate rises, they couldn't go to the bank and get the $700,000 they wanted, they still had $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 saved, which meant they could still be quite aggressive and still, in many ways not be impacted by the rate rise as much. So to answer your question, what I'm seeing more and more now, and I think we'll continue to see over the next few months, is people starting to feel the pinch. They've either come off their fixed rate and gone to a floating rate or a variable rate. So, repayments, I've seen some instances where clients have come to me on a fixed 2.99% interest rate, reverting back to a 6.6% interest rate. That's a huge change. And their repayments at times are doubling. So people are starting to feel that. And a lot of my conversations are about, a lot of them are frustrated people, first home buyers trying to enter the market and getting over it a little bit, just can't be bothered anymore. Or just a lot of conversations about what can we do to ease the burden a little bit. Can we flick to interest only on your investment properties to save you some cash, or can we reset your loan terms just to ease things a little bit for the foreseeable future? So that's probably the biggest change, I would say, over the last 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the podcast that just aired, you talked about the effects of the new tax reform that's coming through and what that means for an indicative rate rise and whatnot.
Yeah.
I understand you're not an economist, and you gave that disclaimer quite clear in the podcast. But
I think I've only been a broker for 9 months now, but I've been in banking, since I started my career, I suppose, so 10 months. I think it's really interesting to see how government decisions do and don't impact consumer behaviour. You would have seen in the news recently that the stamp duty concession for first home buyers has increased, or the threshold has. So rather than a first home buyer not having to pay stamp duty on a $500,000 purchase or under, they've raised that to $700,000 and under. And I speak to a lot of real estate agents, and I'm keen to get your opinion on this, but apparently a few first home buyers have been speaking to sales agents and going, well, I'm just going to wait till that comes into effect, not realising that every other first home buyer is doing the exact same thing. And what's that do to that property for sale? It heats up the demand for it, and the price goes up. It probably will go up above $700,000 now anyway, and you're back to square one. I think it's similar with these tax cuts. Like, everyone's talking about them. It's meant to be the equivalent of a 0.5% reduction in the cash rate. That's what we're meant to feel from these stage 3 tax cuts coming in a few weeks' time. But yeah, all ships rise in the same tide, or whatever that saying is, right? So you'd think that everyone's going to be impacted the same sort of way. So it is exciting, but I don't think it's going to help. It's going to help everyone in many ways, but in that same light, not help everyone at the same time. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Leon, what are you feeling in the residential market at the moment as far as sales go? What conversations are you having?
Well, I guess your median house price has gone to $635,000 now, so we're only having a bit of a chat about some first home buyers trying to get into the marketplace, and when your median house price is $635,000, it makes it very difficult. I know Karen and I bought our first house at $69,500, but the interest rates were, Joe, 21%. So, it's all relative, and I know Craig and Leanne would have probably had the same sort of interest rate back then. So, you do sort of pull back a little bit when things tighten up a bit. And I guess, it's just a matter of trying to get the stock. We've got so many buyers now. It's almost a total reverse from 20 years ago where you had heaps of stock. You didn't have any buyers, whereas now we've got so many buyers and we've just got no stock. Now, even though stock levels have risen to 11% year on year, it's still nowhere near enough stock for the amount of buyers that we've got. So that's really interesting. And, with 650,000 people coming to Australia, that's an enormous amount of pressure on housing. And I really don't know. The government just can't do it. They've proven they can't do it. You get individuals then, like up at Clifford Gardens, where they're going to approve 162 units through state government because they're just sick to death of council and what council impediments that they put in place to get some development across the line. So that's a huge level of frustration for, like Jordan, if he's going to build some units over in Newtown, or, if Craig and Leanne are going to build some units, or, do those smaller type projects. That puts a lot of constraint on them. It adds a lot of time to the thing. It also then adds cost to the end project. So all of a sudden, he's bought the property in Newtown well, but the time that it's taken to get to that actual product to the market, it's just got to go up and up and up, And I guess it's the same whether it's in Brisbane, with unit complexes and that sort of stuff. Everything just seems to be going up. Like median unit price in Toowoomba is $435,000. Like that's an enormous amount, Someone that's building units, it's a wonderful number. That for other people that are trying to get into the market, like really, really tough.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what do you think a catalyst that corrects his path for a consumer would be? Do you think it's efficiencies in local government, or do you think it's correcting cost of new build? Or
it'd be lovely if local government got out of the way, because Wagner's did that with the airport. Like it was a runway on a property out at Wellcamp, and they just extended the runway both in length and width and height and everything else that they did. But they pushed local government out of the way and got it done. And I think there'd be a lot more business people, entrepreneurs, and just normal mum and dad investors who, would get on and do stuff if you could get that stuff out of the way. But it's not going to happen. Gary Gardner ran for council this time. I believe Gary's frustrated, is what I've been told. My solicitor, Chris Tate, ran for many, many years and got in there and thought he was going to change the world and couldn't do much. It's very frustrating being in council as an elected official, because it's dominated by the bureaucrats who are in there. So, it's a real hamstring for development. I don't know how they're going to get out of it. I do know that, the driving factors for around the new hospital, and we'll probably talk about that later, with, the growth of Rockville. I've been trying to tell people buying Rockville. Craig, Leanne and myself and Karen, we did a little commercial project over in Rockville. We did very, very well out of it, I can't tell people how underrated Rockville as a suburb is. When you've got $1.2 billion in the budget from state government, that's a pretty serious number. I always say to people, follow infrastructure. Don't follow a real estate's gut feeling. Don't follow the media, because the media are driven by different agendas. So you've got to look at the media, take everything in, and then go, rightio, this is the truth. Because I can tell you, when Clive Berghoff was a mate of mine, when Clive was developing land at Highfields, Clive was all about Highfields. And then Clive forgot about Highfields when he used to develop land over in Middle Ridge. So he would dictate terms to the market of what the market was going to pay for his land at Highfields, and then he forgot about Highfields and then went to Middle Ridge and sold his land in Middle Ridge. And then he might go out to Carney Springs and sell a whole heap of land out of Carney Springs. He dictated the terms of the market. He spoke to all the agents and fed all the agents all the information that he wanted to get out into the marketplace. Really, really clever fella. Very poorly educated, but very clever in what he did, So I had the privilege of, looking at Clive all the way through my life to see how he could manipulate a market. And he actually kept the land price in Toowoomba as low as it could possibly be. And there's some really interesting stories around, the release of land and subdivision work and that sort of stuff in Toowoomba. When out-of-town people come in to try and develop land in Toowoomba, I said, whatever you do, don't buy a block next to Clive because he'll cream you on price. And they said, you don't know who I am. And I said, no, okay, away you go. And they did it out at Highfields. And, I started selling those blocks at $45,000. Within 5 years, we were at $120,000 for that same block in the same area. It was called Highfields Village Estate. And Clive said, Leon, I'm going to start developing some land next to your Highfields Village Estate. You're getting some really good prices out there. I said, yeah, Clive, what are you going to sell yours for? I said, I just got 120 for a 1,000 square metre block. He said, I think I'll start at 90. And that was the last block I sold at Highfields Village because Clive had 123 blocks next door that he was going to start selling at $90,000. So, that's how he does very well to keep our property prices affordable, but he very much manipulated the market.
You did mention it, so I'd like to touch on it. Rockville, massive hot pocket in Toowoomba, 19.28% growth over the last 3 years.
Yep.
Plenty of infrastructure spend coming. What sort of assets do you think people would be smart to place around that infrastructure spend?
Well, you've got to be careful in Rockville because there's not a lot of sewage and not a lot of water and not a lot of stormwater access. So, there's beautiful big blocks, and I've had people talk to me, oh my goodness, look at this beautiful big block. It's an acre in Rockville and I can buy it for, $600,000 or $700,000. I go, yeah, but you've got to buy the 3 houses down the street to get to the street to get your stormwater out. So there's lots of those little things with due diligence that you'd really want to be pretty careful with. But I love Rockville as an area. I love Wilsonton. I know when people ring me, they go, I don't want Wilsonton, Harlexton and Rockville. And I go, oh, well, you're probably just cutting the 3 best growth suburbs out of your portfolio. But, have you spoken to a real estate agent? Oh, yeah, as a matter of fact, I've spoken to 3 or 4 and they all say we should buy in Rangeville, Middle Ridge and East Toowoomba. Now, interesting statistics that those 3 are not our highest grossing suburbs in Toowoomba. What do you think our highest 3 grossing suburbs would be per income of family? Anyone have a guess? Not Rockville. Torrington? Which one? Where about? Highfields is up there, but it's not the top 3. It's close, but it's not in the top 3. It's very close, but once again, not in the top 3, but in the top 10. Mount Lofty. Now, who would have thought Mount Lofty? You would have gone Rangeville, Centenary Heights, East Toowoomba, wouldn't you? Like it's just what you're told, but in reality, it is Cotswold Hills. I think was 4th. Number 1 was Mount Lofty. People underestimate Mount Lofty because it's not the talk of the town. Real estate agents aren't talking about the real numbers. They're just talking about what they think. And that's where I say that's where you've got to be very, very careful. Like if you've got a good real estate agent that's telling you the truth or what they think is the truth, happy days. But if you're listening to the majority of real estate agents that are just talking off the cuff, you've just got to be so careful and take all that information into account and then make your own decision. I talk to buyers agents out of Sydney and Melbourne and fair income, like you just wouldn't buy with the buyer's agent out of Sydney and Melbourne. They're just looking for stock. There's a buyer's agent for a buyer's agent now. So in Sydney and Melbourne, there's people that go out there and look for stock for the buyer's agent so the buyer's agent can go to their buyer and say, oh, we've found Leon in Toowoomba and he's got this really good property over in Rockville. And the beauty is they have no idea what Rockville is or Harlexton or Wilsonton, and they go, oh my goodness, look at the return on that. Oh, look at the capital growth I could make out of that. So over the years, I've made people a lot of money in Harlexton in particular because I took a lot of blocks to auction in Harlexton for the government, and I sold them for 20 grand. The next year I sold them for 40 grand, and the year after that I sold them for 80 grand. There was 3 years in a row where we doubled every time, and I could not get a local person to buy at Harlexton. It was just impossible because there was this stigma about Harlexton that it was a housing commission. That's what started it, the housing commission stigma. You could probably say the same thing about Wairema, but if you talk to Phoebe and I, we cannot get enough stock in Wairema. And 5 or 7 years ago, people wouldn't even consider buying in Wairema or Cambodia or Westbrook. It's just, I guess it's driven by what agents say, and what agents say is, I think they're behind the times because they're looking at traditional data when if you can look into the future and see where the growth's going to be, you follow someone like Ian Knox with his big project at Westbrook, and then council go, oh no, sorry, you can't get your stormwater to the creek, so yeah, we'll knock that on the head. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's just madness, and that could have nearly doubled the capacity for Westbrook. You know what I mean? Council have spent all the money getting the sewage treatment plant out to Westbrook. Why wouldn't you want all those houses to dump their sewage to get all the rates? They just don't think like a business,
Plenty of landmines to avoid in development.
Yeah, there's lots of little ones that you just don't see coming, And I miss some stuff too, There's things that I look at deals and think, oh yeah, this is... The beauty is I look at all the good things in the deal, Karen looks at all the things that could go wrong in a deal, and with the yin and yang, you sort of get a happy medium, don't you? You need that yin and yang. You can't always be the positive person in the deal because too many things go wrong in deals. So you need somebody to be that little bit negative on your shoulder to say, hang on a minute, woo up, have you thought about this, this and this? Remember years ago there was a fella, a local builder, he used to buy 3 or 4 blocks of land off Clive at a time, and he'd do 3 or 4 speckies and just one after the other. And the market changed and he had 7 out at Glenvale, and that was it. He got stuck with 7. Now, Joe, what does it cost to pay off 7 houses? Probably back in the day, 300 grand a house.
In Rockville
or? No, in Glenvale.
Yeah, a lot.
A lot.
Yep.
And he got stuck with that, right? And he couldn't rent because there were no tenants. So he's gone from having a fantastic business model to the market changing, and then boom, he got stuck with 7. I don't know if he went broke, but if he didn't, he went pretty close to it. And you see that all the time with, people when they're on a bit of a roll. The roll's great when you're riding the roller coaster, but when it stops in a hurry, and we can hear it in our office. I've said this for years, probably 26 years now. I've heard it. When the market goes, the phone rings, and when the market stops, the phone stops. And I remember walking out to reception going, has somebody turned the phone system off? Have we lost power or what's happened? Leon, the phone just hasn't run. That's amazing. And it's because there was a 60 Minutes report, there was a current affair report, there was something on the radio that was scaremongering people, which was driven by whether it was the big banks or, something in Sydney or Melbourne. I don't know what it was, but, that's how quick the market can start and stop, And with people coming off those, those fixed rates of 2.99 through to, paying now 6 and 7s, that's a big shock to a lot of people. And especially if you're a young couple, next minute you have a baby, you've got to start saving for that stuff, and, there's just so many things. And in this sort of market, people are going to start losing their jobs. So, you lose your job, you're relying on 2 incomes to be paying that mortgage off. Good luck. You're relying on a tenant to pay your mortgage off, and we're getting, let's say we get 20 or 25 people through a property and there's 2 that you got to pick from and they're probably not wonderful. I didn't think our days on market for rental properties at 25 days on market. That's not something the media pick up because it's not a good story to tell, right? It's only a good story to tell in a downward turning market. But 25 days on market is just such a long time, I just 49 days on market to sell a house. Now, if you're talking to us in our office, we're going, oh no, our days on market would have to be 20 or maybe 30 at the outside, but 49 is the average days on market. That's a long time for a house to be sitting on the market.
Yeah, definitely. Now, on the other side of the coin, we've talked about land and supply shortages. There's no skirting around the fact that there is definitely a massive rental shortage here in Toowoomba and across Queensland and the country. What effects is that having to us in our office?
So it just means that we're having property showings and there might be 30, 40 people coming through the property, but as Leon and Jacob both said, there might only be 1 or 2 quality applications. So you have a very, very slim pickings for a tenant. And you're seeing families move in together because the cost of the rents are increasing so much. And like a suburb like Rockville, you're seeing those lower income families sort of move on because the rents are increasing. So it's sort of affecting everyone across the board.
Yeah, definitely. From an investment point of view, for those areas like your Harleston, Rockvilles, Wairemas, does that ever cause any form of distaste on a tenant's behalf, or is the market just too tight for them to be selected?
I think at this point the market is too tight for them to be selective.
Do you ever get kickback about those suburbs?
Sometimes, yeah, but it's getting to the point where people are like, we'll take a property in any suburb, it doesn't matter. And I mean, Leon has said this ever since I worked for Hot Property, that Rockville was a growth suburb. And we're really seeing those rents increase in those suburbs. So people are not being picky at this point.
And I think you'll see, once the hospital continues to be developed and built out, you'll start to see Rockville become what is currently around St Vincent's Hospital up in Rangeville, East Toowoomba, Mount Lofty, because all the doctors and the nurses want to be close to work because they work long hours, they don't want to drive far. So you'll see a real gentrification go through Rockville, where you might have an old 3-bedroom brick home, someone purchases it, either knocks it down or battle axes the block or works out something clever there, because there are still big block sizes in Rockville, readily available, ready to go for an affordable price. Go in there, build some nice, double-story, higher quality townhouses with, stone bench tops and really good dishwashers and automatic garage doors, like things that just we take for granted in the eastern suburbs that just aren't in the western suburbs at the moment. Like, you have to go a little bit, you have to search for an automatic roller door in Rockville, So you'll start to see some of those luxuries creep into Rockville, and then that'll attract some of the more luxurious tenants, so your doctors and your nurses, and then all the ancillary services that are associated with that hospital. So it'll be a really interesting thing to look back on in 5 years, and hopefully we can sit back here in 5 years and talk about, well, now we need to push further out west. But, looking back on Rockville, that was such an opportunity that we missed, or that some people grabbed onto.
One of the big things we talk about a lot in our office in subdivision, new development works, and when you're in those conversations and people haven't done it before, they often come into the issue of cash flowing these projects and coming into large sums of cash to be able to do the works, because, as we all know, cost of living is getting no cheaper, and neither is building and construction. Joe, what does a framework look like to get in and in front of a bank to fund a development? Of a small sense, we're not talking 120 lots.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you. It is more complicated than what we're used to in terms of standard residential lending, and you do need to have cash behind you, and you do need to have a good deposit. The main metrics when it comes to subdivisions or larger constructions, sorts of projects, lenders are looking at two things: GRV and TDC. So your GRV is your gross realisable value. So that's when you get your quantity surveyors in, you get your plans, you get your quotes, you get everything all together, and a valuer comes over and goes, well, the land's worth this much, and when the project's completed, add that on top of the land, the project will be worth $5 million. That's your gross realisable value, or your GRV. The other metric is your total development cost, TDC, and that is what's it going to cost you to actually build this thing, to make it happen. Lenders normally lend against the lower of those two things at a ratio. So it might be 70% of TDC or 80% of GRV. I'm just spitting out letters at you at the moment. I appreciate that. But basically, in either case, you'll notice I'm not saying 100%, which means you need a deposit. And in most cases, it's a 30% deposit. But it does depend. It is quite a nuanced area as well. And there's a lot of different policies, different lenders. There's non-bank lenders as well, private lenders in that space. So generally what happens is you have that deposit, you get your loan. The good news is the loan's interest capitalized in most cases, which means you're not paying back anything during the cash flow intensive part of developing the site. Okay. Each month, the interest that you're owing gets added to the loan. And then at the end of the project, what generally happens is the lender will ask for 100% of net sale proceeds, which means you did a 10-lot subdivision, you owe $4 million. Well, the first six lots that sell go back to paying back the bank or the lender, and then you keep the profit on the residual stock. That's a very simple, and that's not the I don't want anyone to go away and think that's the only way it works. It's not, but that's the most common way that development works in terms of funding. Does that make any sense to anyone?
Yeah, because you had to dumb it down for me twice to explain it to me the first time. But do big banks still have appetite for that, like the big four, or is this another product?
They do. I think I'd put kind of development and subdivision in a similar category to commercial and business lending in that there's a lot more questions. The security type, there's three main C's when it comes to lending: collateral, cash flow, and character. So who's after the money? Character. Are they a good person? Will they pay it back? Have they been bankrupt before? All those sorts of questions. How much money they're making? Can they service the loan? Cash flow. And collateral. Where's the property? Is it in a flood zone? Is it got a good chance of selling quickly? Will it be on market for a long time? Those three things become way more heavily interrogated when it comes to commercial and development lending. So the same things are actually looked at for just a standard home purchase. It's much more tick and flick, a lot more simple. So yes, banks are still doing it, but they're very picky and they ask a lot of questions, a lot about the borrower. Have they done a development before? Who's going to actually do the construction? Have they got experience? Do they know what they're doing? Like a lot of questions about the sponsor, the person who's actually doing it, or the guarantor in many cases. So that's being really heavily scrutinised. They're not just, there's not many banks who are keen to just go and support a mum and dad just dabbling in a side project. They really want people who are committed to have the experience. But that's banks, right? And there's a lot of non-bank lenders or second-tier lenders who are more expensive, but are more open-minded when it comes to who's after the money and what are their plans with the project itself.
Yeah, definitely. So with the commercial market at the moment, my understanding is it's quite strong. We've seen a massive uptake in that this year. What sort of assets are becoming popular in 2024?
Look, very interesting, Greg. We did sell a commercial property downtown just recently, over $2.5 million, under 5%. Don't listen to this, Rob. Under 5% return. I haven't seen investors with $2.5 to $5 million picking up stuff under 5% return. Like the general rule of thumb was 6%. At a minimum, 7% is average. When you start to get people, and these are cash buyers, and there was a number of cash buyers, it wasn't just one or two, it was probably half a dozen cash buyers and probably a dozen that I talked to during the campaign, which went for about 2 or 3 weeks, so it wasn't a very long campaign. And these people are just coming in with cash, and you just go, I can't even give them Joe's number and have a chat to.
Never heard from these people.
No, and they come in at such low yields, and you've got the Guzman and Gomez out at Wilsonton, for instance, that they're looking to sell for maybe about 3.8 to maybe 4.2% return. Like, if you've got $3 or $4 million, surely you want more than that as a return. That's the sign of the commercial market. That's a very, very strong market. I've never seen that. I've been doing this with Ron Henry and Barry Tees, 26 years ago, and it was always 8 to 10% return for probably the best part of 15 or 20 of those years, and then it snuck back to 7, and then you heard a couple at 6, and then you saw some of those service station sites, that sell through Cushman & Wakefield at sort of mid-4s, but they got a 20-year lease on them, but they're still a service station site, and you're only ever going to get 4.5 or maybe 5% return. Surely you can make your money work better than that. That's why you start to see people, commercially minded people, start to pick up, blocks of 4 sheds, because if one tenant's out of one shed, they've got the other 3 rented, and then you've got the chance of renting that 4th shed, or a little strip shopping centre with 5 or 10 tenants. If 1 or 2 of the tenants, don't make it, well, you've got 7 or 8 still in there paying the money. And that's why I see a lot of people go down a single track, which is maybe a residential track, to invest in, and they just discount commercial because they think maybe I need a 40% deposit or a 30% deposit, and they go, I'd rather not do a 30 or 40% deposit, I'd rather just stick to the 10% deposit for residential. And it's just wrong thinking, because the risk and return, a residential place, you might get your 4% maybe 5% if you're really lucky. Or like all the southern buyers, they want a positively cash flowed residential property, which doesn't really exist, especially not now that the rents are going the way they are. So I think it's a really tricky place in commercial. I've looked at a lot of bigger commercial deals. I've got clients with $10 million cash, mate, waiting to do stuff. We just cannot find them anything. I've got a big group out of the Gold Coast that have up to $100 million to spend. Once again, just can't find them anything. It's really tough. The stock's not there. And then the people who may consider selling those sorts of properties say to me, well, Leon, what am I going to do with $10 million? Like, I'm already getting my 20% because I bought it 20 years ago. What am I going to put that money into? So there's a lot of quite wealthy national families who have had very good businesses and big franchise businesses throughout Australia, and they're looking to deploy capital and lots of it. And it's really scary with the amount of cash that people have got. It just really opened my eyes. After COVID especially, you go, what do you mean you've got $2 million to spend in investment stuff, you know? That blew me away. And it seems to have accelerated since COVID. It just accelerated the people with cash, whether we went through a phase where, you know, it was estate money, it come into family, or if it was people selling out of businesses. We saw a lot of money come in from farmers, you know, so big farms selling up. I know there was one of our clients come in with $10 or $15 million off a farm, wanted to buy some commercial property, couple from Moree. Sorry, mate, you got $5 million. Surely you can find me some. I'm so sorry. I've rung all the commercial people I know. They're just not interested in selling, you know. So it's not a bad spot to be in, but commercial's been very tightly held, and I think it's going to be continually tightly held. And you're starting to see a lot of the big companies, the national and stock exchange type companies, coming and buying, you know, Clifford Gardens, Wilson Shopping Centre. Even though the Range Shopping Centre is still owned by a local family, I think you'll see someone come in and probably take that over, and you go, wow, that's a big number for that shopping centre.
I guess that provides some confidence in the Toowoomba economy more generally as well, that you're seeing big players, and Aaron and I spoke about this on his podcast. You follow the big sharks, so you follow the Bunnings, you follow the Guzman and Gomez, you follow some of those big national ASX-listed corporations to see where they're putting their money, because they have huge research teams behind the scenes. That, like, Bunnings has a whole property acquisitions team. So they are just all day, every day, scoping sites for new Bunnings properties to go on, which, you know, you just can't fathom a whole office full of people thinking, where do we put the next Bunnings? But it's a real thing. The Guzman and Gomez are listed on the stock exchange today. You know, they've grown phenomenally, and you could nearly pinpoint where a Guzman and Gomez goes. That's a fun phrase to say. Where a Guzman and Gomez goes, growth follows. You know, like, they've chosen Wilsonton in Toowoomba for their new site for a reason, because they understand that's where a demographic is who spend money on fast food through a drive-through, live, and they can see the spending. They can see the Starbucks just opened there. Like, that's the only Starbucks in Toowoomba. It's not the hot mamas who want a pumpkin spice latte in East Toowoomba. It's actually the people that want to drive through and get a coffee at Starbucks from Wilsonton, or coming in from Cotswold Hills, coming in from Gary Junction, coming in to work in the industrial estate. It's interesting to, and I'm going to pinch Aaron's line, to follow the big sharks and where they're deploying capital. But I think it does give a lot of confidence in the Toowoomba region that they are putting the money here, and they're not putting it in, you know, anywhere else, you know, or they are putting it in other places as well, but they're considering Toowoomba, and they're continuing to deploy capital in Toowoomba, regardless of the economic climate and the headwinds that you hear in the media, because I think Toowoomba has a lot of tailwinds behind it. And whilst it may feel like headwinds in the media, when you actually get down to business, there's a lot of tailwinds and a lot of positivity to be had.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. I think as long as we can get over the supply and the efficiencies of building and getting through council, I think there's a lot of great potential here for doing some really good business. One last question on commercial. I remember 3.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, right before you started your most recent commercial project, I asked you, why not residential? There's a big shortage coming. And you said, well, no one's building commercial. There's going to be a shortage. How'd that play out?
I think it played out pretty well. I like to do the exact opposite of what everyone else is doing. So when everyone's building units, I'd like to go and build a house or a couple of houses. When nobody's building commercial, and you saw all the big guys, they weren't doing commercial. The FKGs, the McNabs, they all got into that really big stuff, down in Brisbane, the Gold Coast, even in Sydney, Melbourne. And once the big guys get into that really big stuff, it leaves a big hole in the market. You had the Lawson construction guys locally who do a bit of commercial. You have Graham Nielsen out there at Wilsonton, does a fair bit of commercial. They're busy enough with just their clients' work. They're not out there developing investment stock. And, FKGs, Gary's been very good at developing a lot of investment stock. Gary chases the tenants, so he's got the tenants lined up to go into the property. He probably does a big rent-free period at the beginning so he can bump the yields up so he can get extra money on the other end. So, and that's something when you're buying a commercial property, it's a secret to buying commercial property. You've got to look at the lease entirety, because if there's a big 12-month, 6-month, 12-month, 2-year rent-free period up the front end, that means that the value of the property has been inflated, and it can be significantly by millions of dollars. But it's also a trick. If you're a commercial owner or builder, you might give them that rent-free period up front to bump the rent up later in, If a tenant gets 6 months rent-free, they're more than likely going to sign a longer lease, and they're more than likely going to pay you a better rent, But they need that period at the front to help them get established. And, they're just a better tenant long-term. I remember an old fella used to say to me in commercial, if the tenant's not making money, they're not going to pay you their rent. So that you always got to leave a bit in it for the tenant, So that was, so important. Yeah. And I think a lot of commercial owners sometimes don't, leave that bit in for the tenant, or leave that bit in for the next person, or even with a residential property, they want to extract every last cent out of the tenant or the deal. And when I do my projects, I like to be just a little bit under the market, not cheap, but just a little bit under the market, because then you're leaving a little bit in there for that next person to make a bit more out of it. Yeah,
that's brilliant. So to add on top of the incredible amount of tenancy applications you guys are fielding, the incredible inquiries, the shortages, the amount of people we've got coming to our office who are moving to Toowoomba without housing, we have now received, I think it's the third or fourth tranche of new legislation on the rental laws here in Queensland. What would that mean for a property owner?
Queensland government has brought in new legislation effective 2 weeks ago and 12 months retrospective, which is very handy for us, that we can only increase the rent on a residential property once per year per property, not per tenancy. So where you might have had a tenant change over, someone break their lease or just move out at the end of their lease, if they've had a rent increase in the last 12 months, you can't bump it again at that vacancy period. So it's meant for a lot of intricate leases that we've had to do, and a lot of systems that we've had to create overnight to track when the last rent increase was, when the next rent increase is eligible. We have to put a special term on the end of our already 32-page lease agreements, so make it 33 pages, to then increase the rent at a certain date by a certain amount, and then we've got to try and forecast, what the rent's going to be at that time as well. And then there's more rent reforms coming. There's more legislative reforms coming for residential investors, and that's really in the aim of protecting a tenant. We don't believe that it's been made in the best interest of our clients and property owners, but it's something we've got to deal with. I guess, Bridget, we're on the phone telling people about this, and we get attacked as it, as the property managers, but we're just the messengers, unfortunately. We don't get to control the policy. We just have to respond to it accordingly. And as long as we can be as proactive as possible, as opposed to reactive, then hopefully we can do the right thing and be a bit ahead. But there's more changes coming to allow tenants to transfer bonds between properties, which is obviously challenging because you can't release a bond on one property until their tenancy's been finalised. We've done our exit report. There's nearly always something to pick them on.
So we've got a number of owners at the moment who have, in some instances, ageing tenants or tenants with disabilities, and they choose to leave rents low. Say they were to have the tenant move out and we go to re-advertise the property. There's no movement in that, is there?
No, that's right. So, well, we were only having the conversation the other day that we've tried to look after good quality long-term tenants by only bumping the rent $5 a week at each renewal, or, per year, sorry. And they signed 12-month leases and we bumped it by $5. And now, this change really forces owners to maximise their rent increases once per year, because they can only do it once per year. And if they miss that opportunity and they've signed a 12-month lease, you can't increase a rent during a fixed term agreement if the rent increase hasn't been factored into that fixed term agreement already. So, and when you've seen capital values of properties increase so much over the last couple of years, yields have to follow that. Otherwise, you will lose that interstate or out-of-town interest in investing in Toowoomba, because they're going to look at our properties and go, well, yeah, you've got a bunch of fantastic landlords looking after great long-term tenants, but I'm going to be, just handing money over to the bank, thanks to Joe, for allowing me to buy something that's so poorly investment quality. So we need to increase rates. We need to increase rents in line with how the value of the property has increased over the last couple of years, because otherwise we're just going to be chasing our tail and it's just a compounding problem.
Another situation that could come up if the property was not tenanted for 3 months and significantly renovated, what are the implications there with the new legislation?
So same situation, you could change a property from a 2-bedroom house to a 4-bedroom house and you still cannot increase that rent within that 12-month period, which is just, investors purchasing properties, they're looking to do those renovations and there's no advantage for them.